Is that Elle? Done redirecting YouTube. Hold on, let me turn the audio down on this one so I don't have to hear myself. There we go. Okay, we are now live on YouTube.
Yay. Hello, YouTube people.
Yeah. Get back to Zoom so I can see where we're at.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? That whole YouTube thing.
Yeah. Let's see, gallery view.
I see how much my kids watch YouTube just on a daily basis. It's like ridiculous.
I know. All right. Still waiting on Elle. She's got a few more minutes. It looks good on YouTube.
Well, I can't see you. Oh, well, let me check on. Nah, let's not just fuck everything up.
The lighting looks so much better on YouTube than it does on Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom is a little bit. I don't know what's going on with Zoom.
I know. My hairstylist bought some Neos because he streams on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to him on Zoom and he looks so much warmer on Zoom. But then when we see it on YouTube, it looks great.
Awesome. Oh, yeah, there we go. Oh, yeah, that does look way better.
Yeah.
That's so weird. Oh, well.
All right. I'm going to give her a minute and then give her a call to make sure that she's around her phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see.
Oh, that's very bright.
Yep, she's logging on.
All right. She was just setting up, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She's such a perfectionist. It's ridiculous.
Yay. I'm going to share the YouTube link on some social media. The preview for the YouTube link is you.
It's me? Oh, no. Yeah. That'll just scare people off. You know, it's so funny. I've been getting comments on my beard like on a daily basis now. You know,
looks great.
I do really well with the Jewish community for some reason right now.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yay. Hi, Dan. I didn't get to say hi. We said hi to Matt, but we didn't say hi to Dan yet. Feel free to say hi. We're waiting on Elle to, she's logging in right now. And we will get started.
Awesome.
So feel free to do any of your questions into the Q&A.
Yeah, well, we will do our very best to try and organize and get everything in as soon as we see a little loophole, because Elle's quite the speaker.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had all my questions answered, and we've done a
pretty
couple
much
things
never.
together.
No, pretty much never. But it's all right. You know, we do what we can, and we've got the social media thing going on. So. Yeah. Is Elle logging in, or?
She said she was.
It's what we call being fashionably late.
I'm glad I called her. At least I know she's logging in.
Right.
Yay.
There we go.
Audio is connecting.
Hey guys.
Can't see you yet. There we go. Getting there.
There she is.
And the reveal. Hey, Elle. All right.
you-
So we're doing great. We're doing great. Make sure everything's well. So let me know when you're all set and we will get started.
Oh, did we lose Elle?
You frozen, Elle.
Clear as your guys's. I have an ancient, old-timey laptop.
Well, one with like a twister, or I have to like crank it on.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started.
Oh, we're getting questions in already. That is awesome.
Ready.
Sweet.
Put my phone on.
You all good, Elle?
Yep.
Great. Well, welcome to our webinar. We've been doing a series of these. And next up, now we have Elle Schneider. I'm Pamela. I am the North American account manager. I've been a filmmaker for over 20 plus years. Gosh, done everything on set. So it's been exciting to go over to the manufacturing side and geek out on new tech and lighting. And then Dirk, introduce yourself.
I'm Dirk. I'm just the guy who gets the coffee in the morning. That's all I do.
Just the coffee?
Just the coffee. Makes everybody happy.
Just get the coffee though.
And beer. Don't forget the beer.
After 4, have some sort of principle.
And then Elle Schneider, she's one of our pros, which is exciting, a very talented filmmaker. Elle, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Elle, as you just heard. I'm a cinematographer and director. I work in New York and LA, and I do all sorts of stuff.
Well, Elle, what drew you into filmmaking in the first place? What started you down that journey?
Oh man, I was originally a theater kid, which is funny because if you know me personally, I'm like a very introspective person. I'm like not your normal theater kid, but I got dragged into it with friends, and I was doing a lot of stage managing and costume design. And I started writing, and I actually did put on some plays in high school. And I was always a fan of movies, but one night I was watching Nightmare on Elm Street for the first time, and there was a scene towards the beginning where they used some nice movie magic trickery to get one of the characters, Tina, like up on the corner of a wall. And I was just like, you know what, that's really cool. And I think that I want to do like that, creating that kind of visual was a little bit more what I wanted to do than so it up on a film school, and I became a filmmaker.
Well, you could cut out a little bit there, but I think we got the gist of the movie magic and being fascinated about that and going into that whole world of learning more. That's awesome. Where did you go to school?
I went to USC in Los Angeles, and I actually, my degree is in screenwriting of all things, which we'll see how applicable that is to cinematography. But I do think knowing how to tell a story is integral to the filmmaking process, whatever role you're doing. I think that knowing how to tell a story is helpful for editing, is helpful for directing, is helpful for figuring out what images you need to tell your story. So I think that has had a pretty good effect on my work, whichever
Yeah, no, I agree. Being cross-trained in other platforms, I think some of the best directors came from editing and that sort of thing. But you're frozen again.
Oh, weird.
Now you are. Okay, you're good. No, like I said, I think being cross-trained on different aspects of filmmaking make you a better filmmaker. So it makes sense that screenwriting helps you tell that story. Um, Now, filmmaking, as we know, it's evolved quite a bit over, especially in the last 10 years, 15 years, and things like that. What advice do you give to filmmakers as things evolve to continue understanding and learning and utilize those new techniques and tech into the story making?
Well, for me, you know, you're never going to be able to chase every single camera trend or lighting trend or new technology or new social media platform. So really the core of everything actually goes back to what I just said, which is figuring out the tools that you need to tell a good story. And I think one of the most interesting developments that we've seen with technology over the last few years is obviously how much everything's become accessible, but also how much even the really small, like less expensive stuff is high quality enough to compete with things that used to be very, very expensive back in the day. And the result of that is you can have now a small kit that allows you to create something that if you've taught yourself how to use it, you can really use to great effect. You know, it's questionable these days how big, if you're on an indie scale. I think that a lot of people historically have been intimidated getting into film or trying to make something for the first time. They're afraid that they don't have the resources to make something that looks professional. And what's cool is, you know, just look at, you know, you guys, it looks like, have the Anavos set up in there. I have the, can't really see them as well because they're right there, but I have the Neos set up, and
The
these are
AOS,
like
yeah.
little yeah. Okay, you have the ASs. Yeah, it's hard for me to tell size wise because they're behind you, and they're all round. But yeah, I with these lights, which are small and light, and they put out so much power. For example, you know, like, do you need to have these bigger, bulkier fixtures if you're doing something small like an interview kit? You know, when I was in college, if you were going to do an interview, they would give you this big, bulky carrying case, you know, that you could stuff a body in, with 3 little lights that didn't even output that much power. And now, if I were to do the same type of setup, you could do that with a set of Neos in a bag that's this big that comes with the stands, and it's so much more flexible. So exactly. And so for me, in terms of, you know, new filmmakers and getting into it and what people should do if they're staying abreast of changes, is look for the things that are going to ease your process and make things lighter, faster, cheaper, but still produce the same quality, because there are a lot of really amazing tools out there that can sort of lower that barrier of entry to newer filmmakers. And you don't have to know what the hippest, hottest new thing is. You need to know what tools are going to help you with the process that you're trying to enact at the moment.
Speaking of the process, explain to me your process, because we'll go right into the topic, which is lighting and cinematic lighting for your scenes. Tell me about your lighting process when you're lighting a particular scene. Maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that's such a vague question.
It is a big, it's a vague and big.
Best way. Yes. So for me, the first thing that I'm always going to look at is, what's the genre? What's the emotion of the scene? What's the story we're trying you can have the same location and the same actor, but if you're telling a comedy story versus if it's a horror story versus if it's a Western or it's like a really sad drama, that's going to affect the way you want to frame those shots. And it should affect the way you frame those shots. And more importantly, it should affect the way that you light those shots. Because I think one of the things that we tend to get caught up on with new technology, particularly on the camera side, is, oh, you know, what if I don't have to light, say, because I can get a high ISO on this camera? Well, you're not making a documentary. You're trying to make an audience feel something. And lighting is basically the key tool, other than the actor's performance, to make you feel something. Maybe the music too, you know, look at Star Wars. But lighting is going to change depending on what you're trying to, you know, if I'm in a darker environment, which I'm not in right now, a lot of times, you know, I'll when I'm talking about lighting, I'll use the old flashlight trick, right? Of like, if you hold it up here, it looks like an interrogation. If you hold it down here, it's all spooky, like you're by a campfire. You know, you can hold it back here and you're silhouetted, and you can hold it right here and have like a very basic, you know, key. And those, you know, if I held it that way, you as a human have a different emotional reaction to seeing me lit in those different ways. And so definitely my first approach is, what's the story I'm trying to tell? How do I best tell that through lighting and use of the location? And then also in general, like framing, you know, something I think that gets lost a lot on indie sets that I find, it's sort of the thing that I always run up against, because so often you have, you know, not as much time as you would hope. I mean, probably even on big sets, you don't have the time that you want, but on smaller sets, you're often moving really fast and you don't have time to stop and think. And what can be really cool is also figuring out, you know, how does this character feel in the moment? Is the character feeling small? Is the character being intimidated by someone else in the scene? Things like that can go into your framing, the way you choose to set your focus on somebody, the way you choose to set their heights within the frame. They're all very subtle ways that you can tell us more about the character and the situation that they're in.
No, I like that you mentioned that whole emotion, because there's many times I've been on set and they just light the set and they don't play into the fact of who the character is or the emotion. They just light the set to make it look good on camera. So I like that you brought in that, you know, who is the character? What is this? What emotion do I want to play into it? Because that makes you go from, you know, an okay filmmaker to that next level of being even better and portraying that story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I think it's very hard on an indie set. And of course, the smaller your crew is and the more you have to one-man band things, the more your brain is sort of spread in different directions. But for me, that really has to be the core of it. And it's sort of this unwinnable Sisyphusian fight that you always have to keep at the forefront of your mind, is sort of like, the whole purpose of what we're doing on a set is to tell a story. Even if you're making a corporate video, that is your goal, is to maybe tell the story of the brand or to communicate internally, you know, a goal that the company has, whatever, you know, from a music video, a story, the audience. And something that, you know, can be hard on indie sets is, you know, you do set everything up, you light it, it looks great, you put it together, and then in editing, you're like, it kind of feels like a sitcom. You know, it has that basic coverage. It's not taking full advantage of using to communicate something. And for me is that I'm a fan of long takes. I'm a fan of letting the performers perform. And I try to keep you in the moment as long as possible. Obviously, there are some genres, like a music video, for example, where often part of the style of storytelling is to be frenetic and cut around or cut on the beat, something like that. But in general, I try to, there are a lot of videos you can look up about, for example, like Spielberg type oneers, right? And I'm not necessarily going for a Spielberg look, but the idea of integrating the camera movement and the blocking and the space into how you're telling the story to be able to stay on people or shift your focus onto different characters, I think is much more successful when you sort of choreograph it than it is if you're just, okay, now it's a close-up on you, now it's a reaction shot on you. And if you historically go back and look at some of your favorite films, many of them have almost no coverage whatsoever. A lot of times, they're moving from one shot to another shot, but they're not necessarily returning to that last shot. They're not cross covering. They're not, they're punching in on a close up when there's an emotional line to be cutting in on. One of the tricks that I use a lot is to kind of slowly get the camera closer or use a more telephoto lens as characters, say, get more intimate with each other or get to know each other. And then if, for example, something happens in a scene where they lose that connection, then you can come back out to wider and feel the space and the distance between them, and using that space and distance with lenses is something that I play with a lot. And just understanding like why you're using a close-up for this shot and not a medium, and when we're seeing two characters in a frame versus when we're over someone's shoulder, all factors in to that visual storytelling.
So it's the Elle look, not the Spielberg look.
I got a question out of the audience, by the way. Sorry to break up the whole thing, but I just want to hook into that.
That's what you're here for.
Exactly right. I mess up. That's what I do. So I got a question from John, who's asking about color gels and setting white balance and what the pros and cons are. It's actually quite a good question. So how do you deal with that, Elle?
Okay, so my sort of most often used quote is, I come from the Dario Argento school of lighting. Just one reason why I love lights like the Titan. I learned how to light with clamp lights and from Home Depot and gels, because the benefit of having a screenwriting degree is that we were always picked last in basketball as far as access to the gear. So we often had to sort of find our own gear. So I love using party gels and strong lights. And in terms of if you're talking about like neutral, I'm going to use a tungsten fixture and put CTB on it and correct it that way. I don't use that as much unless I'm planning to just need to match fixtures. But I use color gels quite a bit. And I will, if I only, for example, have one light that can do RGBWW, I'll gel some of the other lights sometimes. One thing that's nice too is, obviously white balance tricks in camera where you can go all the way cool or all the way warm. And if your light is sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum there, you can get some of those funkier light looks out of the light without even gelling it at all, just by turning it, all the way to the tungsten setting or all the way to the, cool setting. I'll do that from time to time to get, for example, like a moonlight look. If you're going to put your light on daylight and then be pretty warm and your camera's white balance, you can get some of that nice like bluish cast. But I'm a big fan of gels and diffusion and on-camera filters. I use all of those quite a bit. I'm usually using some kind of softening filter, because also a lot of, for me, there's no right look that's always going to be consistent for every single project. But for me, I often get taken out of a film or TV show if it is too, something that's very cool about modern camera and lenses. Did I cut out a little bit again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think somebody set
Okay.
fire to the 5G tower there with you.
Right when you said when it gets two and you left us hanging, we're like, to what? What is it?
Oh God, now I've forgotten. What was I gonna say? Oh my God.
It kind of takes you out of the moment when a
Oh,
production
yes.
of TV shows too.
So there's a cool aspect to modern camera that I think it did it again. Didn't do it again.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't want us to
okay.
hear the cliffhanger of what.
Not that big of a secret. Modern cameras and lenses, like the optics have become so clean and so good that they actually create a dimensionality on screen. And when you have a brand new set of lenses, particularly some of the full frame lenses, characters can really feel like they're popping off of the screen. When you shoot on film, however, the images, the characters, and the background, they all sort of feel like they're on one plane, like a painting. And those are two very different vibes in watching a story. And one isn't bad or good, but for example, if you are watching a period piece and everyone's sort of popping out of the screen, it can sometimes feel jarring and fake and weird, simply because that's not the way we're used to seeing and experiencing the past. We're used to experiencing it through older visuals. So often you might want to kind of compress that plane. I don't know a better way to say it, but spatially, filters can help compress that by softening some of the edges of those optics and how they are popping characters out and just objects in general out. So I play with that stuff a lot. In fact, the feature that I am in the middle of that we paused due to world circumstances is a period piece set in the 70s, and the director was very intent on only using camera moves and lenses that were around at the time to try to really make us feel that the film takes place in the time period that it's set in. And we had a lot of debate on cameras and which ones we were going to choose. I went with the Vericam as the A cam because I find that it tends to be, well, I find that it tends to be more of a chameleon. And look, I love the Alexa. I have grown to love the Red. I haven't used the Venice before, but I keep finding myself coming back to Panasonic, and I always have. I got my first Panasonic camera in college in 2007. But I find they tend to be very neutral, and it's easy to build a look on top of that. And you can go in many different directions with it. And so I was pretty happy. We went and some Kawa anamorphics, and the Kawa anamorphics are really funky. But they gave us that sort of 70s vibe. And then we used like a ton of dolly tracks and zooms, and I was going back and forth between sort of hand turning my zooms to give that little sort of imprecision. And then my AC was like, I'm going to take pity on you and get a Microforce from the rental house. But it feels more mechanical. It doesn't feel as sort of voyeuristic in the zoom when you have the motor on it. So I still kind of tend to go back and forth. But in terms of, I don't know if that answers the do you use gels? And now there's like a helicopter. Curious. They're coming for me, guys. They're coming for me.
No, I think it does. I think, there's a lot of pros to using gels. I don't know any
I
set or
used
production that hasn't used any sort of gels from my
Yeah.
20 years of experience.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
also
we had the conversation the last time, I think, also with I believe George Willis from the
Mhm.
CC, and then also Elle's friend Phil Holland. Where we had the discussion where we said, okay, well, gels are a very sturdy base on shooting, and then you're like, well, depending on the light you have behind it,
Yeah.
that really depends on what you all want to do.
yeah. Yeah.
John was asking, and I'm
Well,
sorry to cut in again. Sorry.
yeah. Yeah,
Go ahead,
you're good.
Dirk.
Okay. I got another question from John McCara where he said, what sort of power do the lights give when doing a film? Do the lights have to be quite close to the subject, or can you light the subject from a far distance? I mean, I think, and Elle, you would agree with me here. I mean, I think if you look at any other set, when we were released the Titan and when we brought it to the first set, and the people on set asked me, I think it was Oliver from the set of Arrow,
Mhm.
and the first question you had is like, oh well, how many lux does this light have? And we're like, well, it's got like 23,000 lux on like 3 feet. And he's like, oh, that's nice. We're just going to use it at 10%, but oh, that's cool. So it's it really depends on what you're trying to do. I think you agree with me, Darrell, or you have a different perspective on
Yeah,
that?
I totally agree. I mean, it's so many lights are, there's infinite combinations of the way that you can use them. I mean, if you want to talk about uh, how and where to place lights, that also is going to come back to certain things that I talked about before, one of which is sort of the tone and emotion that you're going for. A light that's closer to the subject is going to be more harsh. A light farther away is going to be softer. A light farther away is going to probably, unless you have barn doors on it, it's going to splay out onto the wall, and is there unless you have like a really small light. Um, it's not going to be as shaped, um, uh, but it really depends on what you're going for. I mean, if obviously, there's practicalities, like if you're shooting a wide, the lights have to be farther away. And I think most people tend to light with fixtures farther away to give them space and room to maneuver the camera without having to move the lights all the time. I think we do associate sort of a set lighting grid with TV, but it's a way to work with film, either to really set what the scene looks like and then just make minor adjustments as you go. For movie magic, like if you're lighting from the kitchen, then you have to turn around and see the kitchen. Obviously, you can't keep the light there, but you still have to fake something, right? But in general, I try to get one set up and then just tweak a little bit here and there as I can go. I'm not going so far as like a noir look where they're like, we don't, we're making a rule of not having a ton of lights and placing them in stylistic, strategic places and not changing things and just sort of seeing where the characters go. But I'm definitely inspired by that style of lighting.
Well, Dirk, can you put in the chat, Stefan, we just released a video with Stefan doing a little mini short, and he's got some good examples in that video of him having the light really far out and lighting a scene to very, close up with his actor. So if you haven't seen that video with Stefan on our YouTube, that one will kind of answer a lot of that questions of how he uses that light both far and up close. Yeah,
I'll make sure to post that in the chat so everybody can have a look at that. I have another question from Dan Galley, actually, and this is also a very interesting one because Elle, we spoke about this before the whole release of Titan, actually, and he's asking, so what are your feelings on gels versus RGB? And I can remember that we spoke about the first thing where we said, most of the RGB panels and still are out there, are having a lot of a hard time to actually hitting the exact color temperature of that gel. Yeah, it's always very hard, where you can say, well, gels are always, consistent, but then you talk about, okay, what kind of light are you putting behind it? Is your color temperature going to shift? What is it going to do? So it's always good to check that with a light meter. But yeah, well, what's your idea on that, Elle?
So I have two thoughts on that. One is that so frequently I'm like, damn, I wish I had brought gel XYZ to set and I didn't, or I don't have a piece that's big enough to cover the particular light that I want to use. And you really have to, when you're talking about gels separately from a light, if you have the option to bring an RGBWW light, gels are always going to be a little bit more of a pain for various reasons. If your clips break or something, which I've had happen if people are using clothespins for their gels, right? I've had gels melt 1,000 times. So there's many practical reasons why having an RGB WW light is preferable, and especially something like the Titan, where it has built in like a billion different gel colors. You don't have to worry, because gels themselves, like nice lighting gels, can actually start to become very expensive too. So to have a full catalog at your disposal that you can cut whenever you need for every project becomes a little bit annoying endeavor, whereas having it all built into your fixture the way it is on a Titan is very, very particularly when you have that combination of being able to use the built-in diffusion. That really is sort of a game changer with being able to use gels and diffusion at the same time, because so frequently the gels themselves are cutting your light output like tremendously in order to get a really saturated color. And so then putting diffusion with that, it's like you start to really lose a lot of your light. And RGBWW fixtures like the Titan really take away that problem, and you start to just live in the lap of luxury and take it completely for granted. I've been using the Titan on the sort of two little projects that I did. And I'm shooting a music video actually starting later today that's also going to be using it. I've been using the color options on it quite a bit. Plus, I mean, if you're a nerd and you have nerd friends, you can use it as your disco party light, and what's
Well,
not to love about that.
I wanted to ask about your experience, because you've had the Titan for a little bit now and some Neos. Tell me about kind of some BTS stories of using that and how it's affected you shooting.
Yeah, well, the Neos are really great little versatile tools. I find myself using them very frequently on set in places where I would normally get very frustrated and backed into a corner. So for example, on this feature that I've been shooting, which is being shot on a location as opposed to a soundstage, there was one scene that the ceilings were very low, and it was a small room. In fact, there was a closet in the room, and in order to get the depth we needed to separate me from the subjects, I actually had to take the tripod and go into the closet. So it's a very like silly kind of DIY setup. But one of the issues that we ran into there was the ceilings are too low and the room was too narrow to put light stands in there. There's no way, we just didn't have room for lighting fixtures in there. So I asked my gaffer to take the Neos, and we taped them to the ceiling in the corners of the room. In a way that was like sort of coming from opposite ends, getting some nice hair, and one side kind of keying the people on that side, and the other one would be keying the people on that side. And we then ran the cables along the top of the ceiling and then down out of frame to power. And that was really the only way we could have gotten lights into that particular scene. And it's because the Neos are so light and versatile that, you know, with some good gaff tape, we could get them. Actually, might have even just been normal paper tape, because we were probably not trying to hurt the ceiling or the paint. But, you know, with a relatively small solution, we were able to get a lot of light into that room, and the scene looks really good. And sometimes, you know, my most frustrating sets, I think, in the past have been similar situations to that, where I'm like, I can't light this. I'm shooting into a box. The room is so small. You know, there's not a window in there that I can, you know, get light in coming from the side or something. And this really gives you options as far as how you can get out of a pickle. So I've started bringing them with me, regardless of whether, you know, I use them for every single project or every single scene, just because knowing that I have an extra fixture that I can pop in somewhere and fill out a spot or highlight a spot that I didn't, you know, have something to cover, is really opened up my sort of it's given me a new way of thinking about lighting on a set, if I can just pop little lights in here and there. I've never been a natural light kind of gal, because I don't think natural light exists. I think absence of light is absence of emotion, typically, most of the time in storytelling. So I'm all for using more lights if you can get them. Not all the lights at the same time, but a strategic deployment of lights, I would say.
Strategic deployment of lights. I like that. Yeah, that's been my experience. And as more and more filmmakers, especially the higher end filmmakers, they're using this to find where they want to put the key light. You know, it's a nice little handy tool to go up to their subject or their stand-in, figure out where that key light's going to go, then bring in the key light, and it makes their life a whole lot easier. So not even as a practical or using it as a fill or whatnot on set, but using it as a tool to figure out how to light your set is what I'm hearing feedback from, which is great.
Yeah.
So now on your project, you use the Titan as well, correct?
Yeah, and it's awesome that they can. Yes, on the last music video that I did not have it in time for the feature, although we will now have it when we come back to do the last week of shooting on the feature.
Oh, that's great. That's great news. Great news. Now, is there any, let's see, I wanted to ask kind of a little lighthearted question. Throughout the years, we all kind of learn funny tips and tricks on set. For example, you know, I learned in a time crunch or when it was a one-man band that my subject was all oily and I didn't have a makeup artist on hand. So we went into the bathroom and used the toilet seat covers to blot my subject to help them not be oily. And I've used that over the years. Are there any like tips and tricks and funny things that you've learned over the years that you can share as a filmmaker?
I guess for me, I find that kind of stuff is cyclical, where once you've sort of learned a trick, you find yourself using it like a bunch of times in a row. So for me, I think the trick like that I've been using a lot lately is you can ratchet lights to more things than you thought that you could. So for example, the last music video that I shot, so to set the scene a little bit, I was shooting a feature in March in a somewhat remote location. And out of, you know, responsibility to what's going on, we paused our production, and a number of our crew were invited to actually just stay on set. because it might be easier or safer for us to hang out here rather than go back into New York, which is the closest big city, while everything was good and crazy. And so 7 of us chose to stay out here, one of whom was a musician, and we made a music video for him. But the majority of our gear, basically everything that wasn't owned by me personally, went back to the rental house. So we ended up having, for example, my lights, but no light stands. And that was an interesting conundrum. Actually, we do have some stands because the Neos come with stands in the kit, but we don't have a stand for the Titan. So we did things like put a nightstand on a bed and then ratcheted the light to the nightstand to get it to angle down onto the floor.
Well, while you're frozen,
Twitter, like a week or 2 ago.
You froze a little bit, but the Titan does sit very solidly.
Oh yeah, it does sit very solidly. We ratcheted it just so it wouldn't fall on me, because putting it on the bed is not, you know, the smartest thing in the entire world. Soft surfaces are not recommended. We also, we needed to get it through a fairly tall window for one of the scenes. And so I still had my 2 grips up here with me. So they rigged a ladder rig for it, and we were able to put it high on this ladder and ratchet it to the ladder. And it was great because they like took a photo of it, like a Shitty Rigs photo of it, where they have the Titan on like the top front of the ladder ratcheted to the ladder, and then they found like a cinder block that's dangling in the middle of the ladder to weigh it down, because we didn't have sandbags anymore.
Oh, that's great.
You know, it's not the ideal way to work, but I think sometimes you have to exercise that resourcefulness brain that you have tucked away in there.
Yeah. Well, that's what filmmaking is all about. That's how it started.
Exactly. You have more options than you think that you have a lot of the time. And if you stop panicking and say, okay, what do I have to practically solve the problem that I have here? You can sometimes find some clever solutions. So lately for me, that has been, whether it's taping things or ratcheting things, you can get the light anywhere you want if you think about it hard enough.
Do we have another question from the audience?
We have multiple actually, so it's I was just waiting until you guys were done, so it didn't. I mean,
I can keep telling you about ratcheting things.
Yeah. Actually, got a question here from Will Wong, who is asking, does Elle ever use the diffuser, and how does it work? I'm assuming he's meaning the diffuser gels that come with the Neos and the EOSs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Do you ever use those?
Well, yeah. I mean, so I will confess that I both use them and I lose them. So I try not to lose them. But on occasion I have, but it's because I'm using them pretty frequently, because I like them. Again, I'm a big fan of that, and sometimes you do want to like soften it up a little bit. On the Titan, I use the Diffusion, either use it at like full diffusion or no diffusion, depending on what I'm going to do. The location where I'm still staying has an event space that has like a bar, and we used that bar for the music video. And so we ended up using like much stronger lights when we were, you know, less diffuse lights with the Titan, when less diffusion when using the Titan as our main light in that scene when we were wide, in order to really blast it with light. And then when we are going in and doing some more close-ups and stuff, I'm using diffusion a little bit more there so that the characters are not as contrasty, you know, that the light is softer and more flattering on their faces.
Yeah. He's actually talking
it's
about the Illuminator wrap around EOS, and I actually know for a fact that you haven't received one yet.
that is
I just
correct.
used it. Yeah, I just used the Illuminator recently on my daughter's senior portraits. And normally, for my experience with the diffusion and the illuminators and stuff, I don't necessarily always use it because the light's pretty soft in general. But like I did an underwear shoot a few months ago, and of course I want that as soft as possible. So I'm using the diffusion and the soft boxes. And then my
The model or the
daughter,
light?
on the
Sorry, I had to ask. Everybody was wondering, I'm sure.
On the model. But when I was doing my daughter's senior portraits, we had to go inside, and it was a very small area, but I did the illuminator so I can get some more light wrapped around her. And so it really depends on the subject. For the most part, no, I don't use it, but for different instances, when I'm shooting the underwear, because I have a client that's an underwear company, or my daughter who I wanted to soften even more because she had a breakout and I wanted less editing in post, I use the illuminator. So it's kind of, that's where you find your look, and what you want and what your subject is going to depend on how much diffusion you use or don't use and how much wrap you use.
Well, to put it a little bit into context, Will, oh, by the way, you look like a college student, Pamela, according to Will. I think that's a compliment. I hope that's a compliment. But as it a little bit works.
It's probably because
it's how I lit myself.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. This is going wrong so fast.
You started it.
College, underwear models, where are we going?
Oh man, what's going to go? Man. But to put it a little bit in context, well, so the Illuminator is a 51-inch umbrella, and the bigger you make that umbrella, the softer the spread is, pretty much, just to put it into context a little bit for you. So when you put in the EOS at the back, which has a little bracket when you buy the bundle, actually, it actually gives a wider spread and a softer spread. So I believe, and please forgive me if I'm a little bit off, but I believe it saves you about 1.5 stops, 2 stops.
It's closer to 2 stops from my experience this last week, a couple weeks. Yeah.
So that's pretty much what that Illuminator does. So if you we actually dealt with this last week in our photography webinar, or 2 weeks ago already, where if you're shooting a model or doing anything with video in the modeling, you want that really nice soft spread, that's where just an umbrella just helps you, because of that power that the EOS is actually giving out. So it just makes it a little bit softer. And then we have a special guest, actually. We have David from Schneider Optics in here asking questions for some
David.
reason. Hey, David. And he was asking, Elle, have you been taking advantage of the SFX settings at all?
Yes, I have. I certainly used the cycle one in the music video a bit. That's probably my favorite one. I meant to, so we made another little sort of quarantine PSA while we were out here, and I haven't had time to finish editing it because we had the one music video and then this other one that I'm shooting today popped up, and I'm like, I have a feeling there's going to be more restrictions later in the summer, so I'm going to hold off on it, use that PSA for part 2. But using the lightning settings a little bit and the police flicker settings a little bit, I really like those. I also have used the TV setting a little bit for the music video that we did. As you know, there's sort of like a guy is sort of slummily watching TV in a dark room, and using the TV setting on the Titan for that was really great at sort of kicking the effect and letting stuff like that is, you know, it's interesting because you might argue that it's, you know, how bright is a difference when you're watching actual TV? Like how much are scenes shifting in brightness actually from shot to shot? Maybe not as much as you would have on an SFX setting on the Titan. However, when you're watching it as an audience member, you understand much more quickly what's happening if you see it more exaggerated, like you would with a filter, like an SFX setting, than if you just filmed an actual TV. Like a lot of the times, if you put on an actual TV, you don't see the difference really, or it's minimal and it looks kind of like weird and grody. So I really like having access to these effects because narratively it helps me to tell the story better. So I've been trying, you know, I tend to embrace some of the weirder options that are given to me as a tool. I try not to run away from those. My sort of most proud moment on that recently, not coming from lighting, but I did a music video back in December, which was released at the beginning of May, find online, and that one actually we did use hardballs for, it wasn't out yet, which is very, very sad. But we used Neos, and we used I think EOS and Anova on that shoot. So we used everything other than the Titan. But because I was shooting in ProRes RAW on a new setup that wasn't set up to go through the professional color grading yet, I ended up grading the whole thing in Final Cut. And it was pouring rain when we shot this scene. And I had originally envisioned faking rain for the scene, because there's a shot where this girl is looking out the window and it's all sad and cool looking. And I was like, okay, I'm just gonna like get sort of like a wet towel above the window where and kind of like squeeze water down onto the frame.
It's a
It was
great
actually
trick.
pouring like so violently.
Oh.
Right. Well, but it was pouring so violently while we were shooting that water was like splashing everywhere. And that was another big benefit of choosing the types of lights that we did. And once it got closer to shooting, we knew it was going to rain, and I didn't want to be running cables everywhere. So we did all battery powered lighting for the most part. But it was basically too much of a mess outside for me to control any water. Like just me being out there, or, you know, my gaffer or a PA being out there to try to do stuff on the window, they would have been getting hit by water from the sky, and it would have been splashing. Like we had to have a giant tarp over the camera. Like it was really hard to even get those shots in the first place. And so I was like, this is so ironic and so frustrating that I can't get
Audio
to do because of the actual rain. And when I was in Final Cut, there's a water filter now in Final Cut, and I'm like, what is this? This looks like the gimmicky-ass dumbest thing. And I put it on there and was like, you know what, it looks pretty good. And it's in the video, and no one has called me on the fact that it's fake. And
Oh,
it's
I
like,
gotta look into that.
and it's like, I might as well have, I think it's only usable for specific types of shots and circumstances, like the one that I did. And it's an effect that's so outrageous that it's akin to, like, you know, the force lightning that was in iMovie back in the day. But if you're making a Star Wars fan film, force lightning is the perfect effect, right? So it's all about the context of what you're using those effects for. And that's how I try to think of the onboard SFX settings as well, is when you're, you know, if I need to think about it this way, like if I've been on huge shoots where they have a cop scene and they don't have the money for a cop car, but then they have to set up this whole damn rig to get the fake red and blue flashing lights to be able to just have a big fixture there and hit the police car option. is such a time saver. It's crazy if that's the
Well,
situation.
not only that is you can adjust, the amount of strobes and the timing of that too, which is,
Yeah.
makes it so wherever you're at in the world or time frame, you can adjust it and make sure that it's accurate or
Yeah,
supposedly
it's
accurate.
also the type of thing where once you have it, you start to think about different ways you can deploy it, like, if you were to have a scene where someone was getting arrested, but you didn't have the tools normally to have a police car situation, so you didn't think about it. Now you have that as a tool, and you're like, oh, what if I just threw this up, in the previous couple shots in the background, like as if the cop cars were showing up. Like now you can add that narrative to other shots very easily.
Mhm.
So I'm a big fan.
Well, we are coming to the end of our webinar, and it's been fun hearing the stories and whatnot. Any last few minutes parting advice for lighting on set that you have for filmmakers? Oh, and
Before we do, I have one more
yeah.
question left,
Oh,
actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's why you're
I had a
here.
couple,
All right, Columbo,
just
go
saying.
for it.
So I got a question from John McGuire. Could you talk about honeycombed options, for example, for EOS Neo 2, and could you demonstrate this as well? Now, we don't have one for the Neo, obviously, but we do have the louver option for the EOS, and I'm not sure if you have one, actually.
I don't think that I do. I use them frequently on fixtures when I have them, but I don't have them for my roto lights right now. But I like them.
I like them
But
too.
if you
I
have
really
the
like them.
option, what
Yeah.
what are the situations that you use them, or how does that work for you?
I mean, I tend to use those more on tighter shots with subjects where I'm trying to control the look a little bit more, basically, is when I tend to use those. If I'm lighting up a big space, I don't use those as much because I'm trying to just get literally every last little ounce of light out of there that I can, and I often want it to be spread in a very wide way as much as I can, but I tend to use them more if I'm going in on subjects, I guess I would say. It really depends on like what style you're going for with your lighting, right? It's like a very subjective choice whether you're using some of these tools and not using some of these tools.
Right.
And then there's also, in general, depending on what fixtures you use, there's some lights that you kind of are always going to end up using them. And then there's other types of lights where you don't really feel they're necessary as much. I think back in the day when there were a lot more fluorescents on set, you would see them used much more frequently. But it just, it's another layer of option to give you to control how the fixture is being used.
Right.
So.
Well, you're pretty much just intensifying that spread, aren't you? I mean, you're just cutting out the spread. That's pretty much what you're doing.
Yeah, and so it's like if I'm trying to be, more focused on a subject, I guess is why I would want to do that.
Right.
Again, which is why, like, if I'm using it to like light a wall and I'm just trying to like spread everything everywhere to just pump more light in there, it's not helping you to have honeycomb on there.
Right. Yeah, I would agree on that.
Well, makes sense. Any closing thoughts for filmmakers about the process of lighting?
Use more lighting rather than less lighting. I'm not saying I'm a big fan of not using. I'm a big fan of not using everything on the truck. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm frequently, I was on a TV series a year and a half ago. We were actually supposed to do another season now, but that got RIP because of the virus. But I was splitting a truck with the other unit, and it was always like a push and pull because the other DP likes to use every light. And again, I like to use a strategic number of lights. But I also, basically the way that I choose lighting is I try to pick a small number of fixtures that can be used for as many different purposes as possible, rather than getting 5 of the same light because that's the fancy light of the moment. I'll take like one sort of neos and a Titan and some kind of floppy LED. I'll like take weirder collections of lights and put them together, because I know that I'll be able to deploy those in more and varied situations. Whereas, the Titans are amazing, but if I have 6 Titans and then I need to go shoot inside of a car, that's not going to help me. Right. Whereas if I have a Titan and I have a set of Neos, then I can light the car and run a cool ways from the inside using the Neos. Right. So it's all about which group is going to best tell your story. And so when I look at a script to kind of break down, particularly if I already know the locations, which sometimes you don't have the luxury of knowing going in, but I'll look at the space and I'll see, where I can hang things and what are the key moments and how I want to light those. And I start to sort of assemble a package around that rather than just saying, oh, let's just get all these expensive things that people always get and just have them on there, whether we use them or not. And for this whole feature, I only used like 6 lights for the entire feature. We had some weird things that were donated. There's a bonfire that's supposedly taking place outside of one of the main locations. So we got all these like extra random lights just to have this like weird bonfire glow outside the house on occasion. But in general, I was using one giant HMI, and it wasn't that big actually. It was probably only like a 2K 4K HMI, and then I was using the Neos, and the Neos got used a lot, and I had a couple other like small panels because unfortunately this shoot was in New York, so I didn't have access to my full kit that I normally have if I'm shooting in LA. And then we got like one really hard Lico, and that was kind of it. I was really happy with that, and I chose those lights specifically, even though we were going to be shooting really different things over the course of our 15-day shoot period. I know that those would address all of the scenarios that we needed, whether it was daytime or nighttime.
Well, awesome. Elle, thank you so much for coming on and spending an hour with us talking about your experience and your journey and some tips and tricks. It's great having you on board, and look forward to seeing the projects you have coming up. Dirk, as always, this disruptor, love it. Again, thank you for everybody watching. You can reach out to us at rotolight.com on our social media. Elle, how can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram. My handle is Attention Soldier, and I'm also on Twitter at Elle Schneider, and my website is elleschneider.com.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Thanks, everybody. See you again soon.